few years ago, the Congress created a position, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Operational Energy, with the specific task of reducing fuel, and had a rapid equipping force that has put some new technology in the field to use less fuel, and that has now been moved under your command.
Right.
What's your vision on operational energy?
So this is a great example of sort of defining the problem before you go out and solve it. And so energy consumption is a problem. I mean, it's a challenge, and it's inherent with the force we have. So, but then you got to decide sort of where is the problem and how do you solve it. And so immediately some people jump sort of to the miles per gallon kind of thing, and I mean that has an impact on it. So we took a look at Afghanistan, understanding that's an environment, that's a theater of operation, and something like that. 80% of all our fuel usage in Afghanistan was used for power generation, not vehicles. So even if every vehicle in Afghanistan got 3 more miles per gallon, 80% of our fuel was going to make electricity. So he said, you know, we probably need to focus on that of which is driving the bill up the highest. So at our exercises that we run out at Fort Bliss at the NIE, I was just out there at the last one. We put a concerted effort, first of all, on our command post, which is where we consume a lot of our power. And even took a look at a division-sized command post, which previously had about 10 generators, 10 very large generators on trailers and all the fuel and that. And you know, with power, there's really 3 parts of it: generation, transmission, and distribution. We found that we had very inefficient distribution of it, that you'd have one generator that would have, you know, it's running at red line the whole time, and then the other one would have, you know, the Colonel's coffee pot plugged to it, but it was still cranking out, you know, the amount that it takes to, you know, 10,000 watts or something. And so what we did was had a smart power distribution system, and then we got better about how we plug that into the talk, and then you might say simple things, but then you say, what are the big consumers of it? You know, the lights. So if you go to LED lighting versus, you know, incandescent, things like that, and we were able to get from 10 generators down to 1 without a degradation in the capability. So that's another thing. You can say, well, if you don't drive tanks and you save fuel, yeah, but now we're walking straight into the enemy, you know, the cost-benefit analysis there. So, so what we're doing with that is we're trying to figure out where are our big consumers of energy, and then what is driving that consumption. We're finding with electricity, you know, it's the generation, so much more efficient generation, much smarter distribution process, and then the transmission of it. If you can generate where you need it, you cut down on those losses. And just by analyzing that way, you can actually make some pretty big impacts.
Hi, I'm Sharon Burke. I'm the former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Operational Energy.
Yes.
So
Yes.
It was great to hear you talk about it. Wonderful, and the Army's done so much great work in this area. Your major fuel consumers are really rotary wing aircraft and vehicles.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
And but that leads to the question I want to ask you, which is getting at the relationship between that fuel consumption and military effectiveness is not easy, and it's really a question of requirements.
Yeah.
Army's had a pretty painful record recently in major acquisitions, major platforms. And I, you know, as a former JROC advisor and DAB advisor, I agree with the people that say it's really a requirements problem, and that's you.
Yeah.
So could you maybe talk to us a little bit about what you're doing in this area and the changes you're making in the centers of excellence, you know, how requirements reform is going?
And you're right, it is a requirements issue. It's all about defining the problem, and I agree, that's where it is. And so as we're working our Army operating concept, a big one is on that part of it, because what happens a lot of times in our requirement process is we focus on a thing. Okay, I want to buy this thing, and it's got to be able to do this and this and this, versus a capability of a formation. Because if you take a look at the capability of the formation, then you have to say, well, but part of that formation is the logistical tail. Okay, so, you know, the fuel trucks and all that, that's part of it. And so this thing that you're buying may be able to do this very well, but the opportunity cost is you have huge force structure to bring fuel to this thing. So when we take a look at it, we're looking at the improved turbine program, for instance, for aviation, because that is a big consumer of that. We are saying, look, there are performance benefits for this thing, but then there's also a lot of second and third order things that are benefits as well and that impact, and we have to look more broadly with regards to requirements. Our requirements are very narrowly defined may in conjunction, say, with the project manager or the proponent. So if you're down at Fort Rucker, which is part of track, you're the helicopter guy. And so you're all about buying the very best helicopter that can do all kinds of things, fly upside down, is invisible, and all that. Your partner is up at CASCOM at Fort Lee, where all our logisticians are. Well, they're worrying about, well, how many fuel trucks does it take to run this helicopter? So that may not actually be your concern if you're a Rucker. What we're saying is it needs to be. That's how we have to take a look at this. We are not organized, even within the Army, to look at things necessarily that way, which is why I'm going to be spending quality time this afternoon in the Pentagon with the Undersecretary of the Army, the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, specifically on that piece. How do we get a better view of total capability we're looking at versus just a thing?
And thank you, Secretary.
And any help you can provide, Secretary, I'd appreciate that.
She was the first one and really started this, made this a major subject in DoD. Thank you for that.